Question around different cultural contexts when it comes to communicating over video. So how do you account for different cultural contexts when it comes to communicating over video? And how much of a difference can cultural contexts make when it comes to communicating over video?
So when it comes to nonverbal communication, the beauty is that it is a universal language. So most of what I teach on nonverbals is universal for the fact that you do end up having an audience that is very diverse. So I don't always teach very specific things of cultural gestures. I try and stay mostly to universal. So we know that judgments like perceptions of trustworthiness, those are universal displays. And we see things that are attached to the fight, flight, or freeze response because every single human being on this planet has inbuilt survival mechanisms. We all have them because we've evolved to have them. So the displays that we see because of the fight, flight, or freeze response, they are universal. For example, like distress cues. And then we also see cooperative displays, things that, like I said, perceptions of trustworthiness, those are universal. So those we can teach that apply to everybody. Now, culture tweaks things, like we have emotional displays that are universal, and culture will have a slight tweak to that. And then you have displays that are very specific to cultures. And these are the ones that are not universal. So if a display doesn't result from something as a universal emotion, fight, flight, or freeze, or a cooperative display, if it does not result from one of those three, then it likely isn't universal. So for example, the head nod or the head shake. This isn't a cooperative display. It's not a display of trustworthiness. It's a communicative display, absolutely, but it's not a display of trustworthiness. It's not a universal display because we develop the ability to understand what this means at, I think, about 2 years old. So it's learned. And different cultures will nod their head for yes. Some cultures will nod their head for no. And if I went through and talked about every single cultural display, we would be here for weeks because there are just hundreds, thousands of different displays. So when it comes to considering these on video, and like you said, the beauty about video is that we can connect with different cultures within our own living room. And a lot of the time we're in meetings with people from all over the world. So this is where you have to do prep. You have to do prep, find out what culture they're from and find out what is different. Find out what are their greeting displays, because that's something that means a lot to people. When you're in a meeting with someone from a different culture and you use their traditional greeting display, that is a huge sign of respect. They might not expect you to do it, but if you do it, it is a big sign of respect. So do that work prior to the interview, but learn the universal displays and then add culture to your toolkit.
Right. Yeah. So it can be case specific depending on the
Yes.
audience or whoever you're
Yeah.
interacting with. I wanted to ask, right, because virtually we know that the way you show up on video is initially, right? The way you greet someone is going to be different from in person. You're not going to be able to shake their hand, give them the cheek kisses, or necessarily bow. So have you noticed different, like what kinds of examples of different cultural ways of showing up to a meeting have you noticed, if any?
Well, it subdues a lot of cultures because lots of cultures are very touchy-feely. You know, they go in with kisses, they go in with hugs, they go in with not just a handshake, but like a full arm touch. It restricts that. So, in a way, when you're learning to use nonverbals for cultures, it's almost helpful because you can't do those things. So you don't need to learn those things. And most of the time, they're not going to lean in and kiss the camera. Most of the time, they're going to take the normal greeting of, hi, how are you? Because there's nothing else they can do. So this is where you really want to dive in and figure out, are there any displays I can show on video? Because now they're going to be centered to this square. This is the beauty about video. We don't think that we have as much control, but we have so much control because now this one square is everything. It's static. We can focus on making it as perfect as we can. So are there displays that you can show, are there certain types of waves? For example, the wave that we do in the UK is slightly different to a wave that you do in the US. So go and do the research on those things because they can have a really big difference when it comes to a virtual communication.
Right. What is the difference between a UK based versus US based?
Well, we do more kind of that rather than that. I mean, not in all parts of the UK. I'd say that's probably
Yes.
like the posher parts.
The poshers, yeah. I was like, that feels so like royal.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's the royal way.
Yes, right. So
So
it's
if
like
you
a
go to
descendant
Buckingham
of that.
Palace, you would wave more like that than you
Right,
would kind of like that.
right.
But then American culture is a lot more animated than British culture too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I think one of the reasons, like when we look at hand gestures at Virtual Sapiens, we don't give people pointers on specific types
Yes.
of hand gestures, even though there's a whole body of work and vocabulary around hand gestures. It just helps us keep that individual culture option open to the individual in question,
Yeah.
right? So,
For example,
yeah.
like with hand gestures, we've talked before about, open palm gestures.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the reason we teach this is because it is a threat versus safety response. It's about we've evolved to be sensitive to this because of the use of weapons. Now, the wave is not an evolved behavior. We're not sensitive to that in the way that we are with open palm gestures because it isn't anything to do with that safety versus threat. Therefore, it isn't an evolved display, it's a learnt display. So it's going to be culturally relevant.
Right. Yeah. And so just to be clear, right, like open palm, palm facing forward gestures, those are considered to diminish that sense of threat because you're literally showing that,
Yeah. So if
not
I
hiding
show you my
anything.
palm, I've not got any weapons. It's like if we're talking and my hands are behind my back,
Yeah.
you're going to be thinking, what's she got behind her back?
Yeah.
And it's going to make you slightly uncomfortable because you can't see what's in my hands.
Yeah.
And again, this is something we're very sensitive to.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. Makes sense. So yeah, I think it's within this playground that we have, we are highlighting some of, not all of course, but some of the most expressive parts of our physicality. And so there is a lot to leverage and consider there. So.
Yep, exactly. And we have a lot of control, and that sometimes is a good thing or a bad thing. For example, sometimes you don't have the ability to change your background. Like my office is currently in the middle of doing work, so I have to do it in a scene that isn't my typical scene until I can get back into that room. So then you have to make sure that your presence takes over that because, sometimes we are in situations we can't control them. For example, if you weren't from home, but you were used to working in an office and now you don't have an appropriate office set up, doesn't mean now you're just like, oh, well, my background's ruined. There's no point me even trying because I have lost control over my setting. Absolutely not. You can still have a very good nonverbal presence, even if the background isn't exactly what you want it to be. You won't have as great a presence. It is better to have a strong background, but you can still make sure that you show up in your nonverbals.
Yep, absolutely. Great. Thank you.